So, guys, I want to talk about AEW Dynamite, and it's been getting a lot of flack because of it being a very bad, follow up show from AEW Revolution. And I do agree that there are a bunch of significant issues. First of all, usually after a pay per view, what happens is that sometimes professional wrestling companies would want to give their talent a night off and be like, hey, you know what, you wrestled a great match, you did a lot of damage to yourself, so we're going to give you the night off, or you really just don't have to care. And, definitely, it does lack a bunch of star power. Or you saw a lot of segments with like Tony Storm or Mercedes Monet or MJF and Will Ospreay. Like they were not really involved in any matches. And then it also goes to what I've said about the Gladiator thing, where there are people like Will Ospreay, where I feel like Will Ospreay should never ever have a match on AEW television, or very rarely, because if you have a wrestler that's very popular and they have way too many matches, what happens is that you run into a situation where they don't become as special really. So it is trying to find that balance. And I also agree with what JD from New York and a lot of people were saying, is that a lot of the matches are predictable. If you know it's going to be Orange Cassidy versus Hechicero, Orange Cassidy's going to win. You have a match with Powerhouse Hobbs, Powerhouse Hobbs is going to win. Next week, they're having a match between Mercedes Monet and Billy Starks. You know that Mercedes Monet is going to win. And also, you know that they're having a tournament for the international championship. We all know that more than likely it's going to be Ricochet that wins it, because you got to have a heel and a baby face. And if they do something like Orange Cassidy, a lot of people are going to say, hey, you know what, he's too controversial, because he's controversial because a lot of people say, hey, he doesn't, he comes off as a little too goofy, or his whole entire I don't take wrestling seriously gimmick. That's not really a draw, really. But then, obviously, if you have Ricochet win, it's almost like, it's too soon to take the title off of Kenny Omega. And if you took the title off of him, then what could happen is that you have a clusterfuck match, because fatal three ways are a clusterfuck type of match, really. So, they want to have Omega versus Okada at All In, title versus title, and they're teasing that. So, you don't think Ricochet's going to win, so why invest in a tournament? And it brings me off to the other issue that I see as well, really, where they overdo backstage segments. Like with Jon Moxley, he would be a lot more effective if he actually was in the ring, really, and he's not really been doing that. So I think that it's like what some people say, he may have too much creative control, or he may just like tell Tony, I want to do it like this, really, and Tony may not care, or Tony may be way too busy to actually like say, okay, I got to think about other shows. But yeah, they overdo backstage segments when it's so impactful for people to actually go down to the ring and actually, just be loud and proud, really. Even if you have to do it with multiple stars in a night, really, that's really a big deal. The next thing that I would say with AEW that's been a huge issue is that, they have very, very bad formatting. Like, the main event is Orange Cassidy and Hechicero, when the main event should have been, Mortos and Speedball Mike Bailey, or the main event should have been MJF and MVP. Like that should have been the number one main event, and maybe the penultimate or the 9 o'clock main event should have been, Mortos versus Speedball Mike Bailey. It just doesn't flow that well, really. And then again, I turn off matches at 9:50. I don't watch the main event sometimes, because the problem with the main events is that sometimes they have a bad choice of a main event, and the other issue is that sometimes, why would I want to watch Hechicero versus Orange Cassidy when I know who's going to win? And then the other part of that is that also too, that it's going to go like an extra 10 or 15 minutes, and I work the night shift and I want to review AEW, because it's nicer to review it after the show happens, so you have the emotions in you, versus 8 or 9 hours later. So why would I want to, watch a show that's supposed to end at 10 p.m. and at 10:10 or 10:15 or 10:20, and who's going to win, really, and it's usually somebody who doesn't deserve to be in the main event spot, really. Like, this whole entire like just picking the main events bad, but also just, the overruns are just not that good, really. And the other issue with AEW, and I'll be really honest, is that they're very, very poor with their pay per views because with spacing out their pay per views because they have way too many special events. I know, like last year, it was Super Card of Honor, Battle of the Belts, and Dynasty within a period of like 3 to 4 weeks. And now you have AEW Dynasty, which is like 3 weeks from AEW Revolution. And it's also a really big deal because and Philadelphia is a really, really big area. And they have to have positive momentum and they have to have storylines and things that make sense, really. So it cannot be a pay-per-view where they're like, you know what, we did well with Revolution. Like, Revolution was a really great show, even though the main event was trash, really, that you need to kind of continue a good momentum. And like I've said many, many times, that the way for AEW to survive the WWE, the John Cena heel turn, all the things that WWE is doing, is just make stronger and stronger shows and keep learning from their mistakes, really. And the bad thing is that April is WrestleMania month, so they may be like, okay, we're not going to care, we're going to drop the ball in many places, really, and they cannot be doing that because they don't have a lot of trust with the audience. And it's not going to take that much longer for people to not really invest in going to the shows or other things like that because they have to have a standard. But one of the biggest problems is Dynasty should have been like maybe at the end of April, like around like April, like, April like 30th, like maybe a week or 2 weeks after WrestleMania, or they should have just even canceled it and say, hey, the next big show we're going to do is Double or Nothing if it's two booked together. Because the problem is now you're going to speedball a lot of just matches and feuds and storylines. And then we're going to see what happens, really. So, that's also another issue is that when you have too many like pay-per-views or special shows, you have to speedball them. And then you have to rush through storylines. You have to kind of rush to get through what you want, really. And that's that. And I also will say that the last big issue is just generally being a very poor judge of matches. That, like I've said, you have Powerhouse Hobbs with a bunch of luchadors. That does not make any sense. And that just looks really bad as well, really. Like, it's a good, like, mix-up, but it's like with LFI, like, Mortos and Andrelisco don't talk to the microphone. They don't have, like, any type of chemistry. You don't see Jake the Snake out there saying, okay, this is why we're having a match against Powerhouse Hobbs. You don't have Hobbs, like, as I said, Hobbs and Jericho would be the thing to do, but they're setting up Hobbs and they're doing Hobbs and Jericho. Though they're doing Hobbs and they're doing Hobbs and Hologram versus, Hobbs versus Chris Jericho, which would be the big money match, really. And I think one of the reasons why Chris Jericho doesn't want to have a match with Hobbs is the exact same thing. It doesn't make sense for somebody like Hobbs, like who is like a big beefy guy versus Chris Jericho, So I also think that, that's another issue as well, really. It's not just bad matches, but maybe some wrestlers are like, what, I want to feud with this person because I don't want to drop my title. I don't want to do this thing or that thing, really. And then also, with bad matches, you see like Max Caster versus Takeshita, and that's also been another issue with AEW, is that I think that they love comedy a little too much. And that's what also really hurt the show, is that you see Harley Cameron dress up like Hologram. She shouldn't be doing that. She should be going after Mercedes Moné or even Toni Storm. And then the next thing is you see something like Max Caster do an open challenge, and I've said this many times. He needs to be winning, so you set up Anthony Bowens versus Max Caster at Dynasty, and then you have Max Caster lose, and then he does well on Ring of Honor, and then you have Anthony Bowens as a new star, really, so like it's just like poor booking, or maybe their ideas for people are just, not that good, really. And, and I just think that's what it is, really. I just think that there's no direction and there's no, like, sense of, okay, you know what, this is the best way to book somebody and other people have to, like, stand by it. Like I've said, like Hobbs versus Jericho, like I don't think they're going to do Super Card of Honor because that's going to feel like a clusterfuck just to shoehorn that in there. But they really have to, but if you have Hobbs and Jericho in a feud, for the Ring of Honor Heavyweight Championship at Dynasty, that would be a match people would want to see. If you want to set up the Ops versus the Blackpool Combat Club or the Moxley faction, that would be good. If you want to set up Jay White versus Will Ospreay for a Owen Hart like tournament match, people would want to see that. The next match that I would say is, if you want to set up Bobby Lashley versus MJF as an initiation type of thing, that could be a good match. Or you can have him do double duty. You have him face the Murder Machine, and it's the Murder Machine versus the Hurt Syndicate, and then you have MJF versus Bobby Lashley like later on in the show. If you want to set up Harley Cameron versus Tony Storm, or you have Harley Cameron versus or you have like a women's ladder match for a match at AEW Dynasty, or at AEW Double or Nothing, that would be really cool. Or you set up matches for the women's Owen Hart, type of thing, and then also like you have Swerve Strickland versus John Moxley, because I think some people are upset about like a possible 3-way match. And then the last thing that I would say is that you don't have Adam Page on the show, so it's almost like what happens with his victory, who's he going after next, really? Is there somebody that's kind of mad about where he's supposed to go, or like set 7 Owen Hart tournament match, have like Adam Page versus Takeshita, or Adam Page versus like the Don Callis family, there's just a lot of just no direction really. They're setting up things, but really the show kind of really suffers from like a bad direction really. And I actually think I'm going to do a fantasy booking of Dynasty, and tell you guys what I think about it. But the show had some very, very poor execution tonight, and I really think AEW should be ashamed of themselves.